would you like to swing on a star?
So you're talking about the sea wall defences, and were they all pretty much built by the Germans?
They were.
They were.
By the Organisation Tour, because remember that this organisation put up most of the fortifications and the walls and everything and the bunkers and so on and so forth all around Europe that was occupied. So they did a lot of work. There was a lot of them.
Yeah.
And you know, they had an awful lot of work to do, but they were thoroughgoing bastards, if I can be literal about them, because they didn't care who they killed. I mean, they would work you to death, and I mean it. And I mean, you know, most of them had no shoes or boots or anything like that. They just had a few things of rag around their feet.
Where did the slaves come from?
All over. I mean, some of them were Russian, some of them were forced in from Spain of all places, but anywhere.
But what determined whether you were going to be spared or become a slave, or?
I don't know. Probably you crossed them somewhere along the line.
Okay.
So they decided they'd use you. I mean, I know a couple of people, probably people who are long since dead now, who refused to work with the Germans over here over something or other. And the next thing is they went to where our concentration camp in this part of the world was, which was in Alderney. And they were kept there to work, you know, and they more or less had to work till they dropped. And there was no question of saying, well, you know, we don't work we're not treated like that where we work, you know, and because you just got hit over the back with the butt of a rifle, you know. It wasn't too nice, really.
Yeah. I've got here, I did a bit of research and I read that a lot of Jersey girls fraternised with the German troops, and this earned them the nickname Jerry Bags.
That's true.
Did you know of any such relationships or ever make friends with a German soldier yourself?
No, not particularly. You'd find that they would try and talk to you if you happened to be playing in a place where they were, if you know what I mean. As I've said, the German soldiers themselves weren't bad. The vast majority of them didn't like to say so because they were scared to, but they didn't like Hitler either. And really speaking, they would have preferred to have been home than be here. Having said that, the Organisation Tour were a totally different bunch of people, because they were given this job, this contract job of doing all this work all around Europe, the seaboard, you know, the edge of the sea, all around Europe, and in places like the Channel Islands, and they just had to get it done. And they were given all these people that the Germans found a damn nuisance, for want of a better way, and dangerous half the time. So they didn't worry at all if they killed anybody. That was a minor detail. You know, if they killed anybody, there was no question if there was an inquest or anything. The bloke was just dropped in the trench probably, and the cement just kept getting poured.
Wow. And did you know of any Jersey German relationships that went on?
I knew somebody who didn't live far from me. I didn't know her that well, but she still lives over here, but she'd be a very old lady now because she's a bit older than I. And she went out with a German officer. At least she had the sense to go out with an officer, I suppose. But I obviously they fell for each other. Not a good thing, but all I would say is it's easy to say that that's, how can we put it, not the nicest thing you should do. I'm very pleased to say nobody from my family ever did it. But I suppose, I put it to you this way. The Germans were fairly well behaved. If one of them was found raping a local girl, and I mean raping a local girl, the chances are, if a complaint was put in against him, he'd just be put up against a tree and shot. Just as simple as that.
The German soldier?
The German would be, yeah.
Okay.
So in other words, you really did need a few who would sort of, for want of a better word, sort of fraternise with them, because it made it a bit better for everybody else, if I can put it to you. And of course, there's always some girls who are going to prepared to do it. I mean, if you did that, it was a bit advantageous for it, because as you probably realise, the rations were pretty bad during the war. And if you did that, well, you'd get a bit of extra food, you see. Out of interest, something that isn't generally known, the bread that the locals ate was different to the bread that the Germans ate. And I don't know what the reason for it is, other than theirs was made of a different sort of, the bread that the locals got, the longer the occupation went, the more you'd have husks, wheat husks, and all sorts of bits and pieces in it, you know. And whereas the Germans wasn't that. Theirs was totally different. It tasted different. Tried it a few times.
Did it taste better than the local bread?
No, it was just different. But of course ours was getting rubbisher and more rubbishy all the time, because we had more rubbish like husks and bits of wheat like this, you know, in its stalks, as we used to call them. Yeah, so from that point of view, yes.
Okay. And did you notice an increase in the in Jersey French speaking? Did people start to speak Jersey French a lot more so that the Germans wouldn't understand?
Well, I'll put it to you this way: up to and since the war, but not so much now. I would say, up to the war, there was a fair amount of Jersey French spoken in the country, quite a lot of it. My parents were very comfortable in Jersey French, far more than I ever was, though the first language I ever learned to speak was Jersey French for that reason. Now the point was, it was much harder for anybody to understand what you were saying if you were speaking in Jersey French. There were subtleties that were a bit the same, like a cat in French is chat, but in Jersey French it's co. And if it was a cow, it'd be, or if it was a horse, say, it'd be a cheval. If it was in good French, it'd be a cheval, if it was in Jersey French. And so really speaking, it was much harder. I mean, if I said to you, fatty cow, you wouldn't know what I'm talking about, would you? I'm just telling you, isn't it hot?
Fatty cow?
Fatty cow. You see? Il fait chaud, on the other hand, so fatty cow sounds very different from il fait chaud, doesn't it?
It doesn't sound French.
No, but it is. But you see, this has gone on all the time, because you know when Granny and I had a house in Dinan after the war, a long time after the war, I had a job done, and I spoke all in French naturally with the fellow I was trying to do the deal with and tell him what I wanted. And so he said, okay, my man will be in tomorrow morning. Well, when his man came in, he was doing something I didn't really want. And I was trying to tell him, but he came from the extreme western part of Brittany. And he was speaking not French, but a kind of patois, which I didn't have a clue what he was on about. And it wasn't until his boss came in, I was able to say, you know, you've told me there's a bloke, I can tell him if it isn't, but I said, I have no clue what he's talking about.
And did it annoy the German soldiers when you were speaking Jersey French?
The answer to that is I really don't know.
Yeah.
But I'm quite sure that they put in amongst the people, you know, walk up and down various places like St Albans, the town, and Gorey probably, and various other places, who walk through offices, you know, who would understand French quite well,
okay,
just to see what was being said.
Mm-hmm.
But they really never came to grips really with Jersey French.
Okay, and I'd like you to describe the feelings of hunger and the impact that this had on the rest of your life.
Oh, you're asking me a very interesting question now. It did have an impact. If I could just say this to you, I think I've said this to you before, Louise, but if you hear of somebody getting sentenced to 20 years because they've killed somebody or something like that, the normal person thinks, oh, it's 20 years, I suppose with a remission they'll get something with that. But I'm always inclined, because my occupation was about just a midge under 5 years, so to me it seemed to be interminable. It went on and on and on, if I can put it to you that way. And so if I hear someone's been sentenced to 20 years, I immediately turn it into occupation. I think, oh God, fancy having to go through 4 occupations, you know. But of course, I probably, when I'm saying that, I forget for the moment that during that time I was extremely hungry. You know, when the liberation took place, I'd have been 15 1/3 then, I suppose, in real terms, and or just a little bit more. And I was much shorter than I am now. And that was only due to hunger, you see. And since I've retired from business, wife and I've cruised a bit because that was my easy way of getting around the world. I sort of decided I would retire when I got to the end of my 62nd year because I thought I've worked pretty hard now. I had a fairly unpleasant experience much earlier on when I was a teenager. It's now time to go and see the world. I can afford it, and I've got the time to do it. And what used to amuse me, there was one fella, I don't know what was wrong, but I saw him a few years on a cruise. I don't know, it was pure coincidence that he happened to be on the same cruise as us. But he was always getting the head waiter down to his table. It was only 2 tables from us, I could hear all that was going on. And he was complaining about the food all the time. And I upset him very greatly by one day saying to him, I don't know what on earth's wrong with you. You've obviously never been hungry. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, if you'd have been through, like I've done, through the German occupation for 5 years in the Channel Islands, I'd have said, I'd never be complaining about this food. I said, the food on board the ship doesn't merit being complained about. It's far too good for that. I said, you've never been hungry, whether you like to admit it or not. And he wasn't very pleased with me, you know.
And what did you eat during the occupation? What was a typical meal?
Potatoes, very often.
Just potatoes?
Oh, not only, but very often it was just potatoes and veg.
Because is it true that you only lived on what was produced in the island, nothing was brought in?
Very little was brought in. A bit was brought in, but not a lot. For example, I've said, remember what I've told you, my father was the local grocer in this part of the world. And about 3 or 4 times during the course of the occupation, he got an allocation of Camembert cheese. Now, do you know what Camembert cheese looks like? It's in a sort of a wooden sort of thing, and it's in paper, and it's very smelly. The older it is, the smellier it is, you'll agree. Whenever Dad got one of these, he would get one for every family registered with him. One only, no more, one. He would shut the shop with a notice on the outside saying, I'm shut for the rest of the afternoon. And he would take all this upstairs into his loft, like, above the shop. And he would open every packet, because there was maggots in a lot of them. And he couldn't take it back and say, look, this one's got maggots in. They'd say, well, that's too bad, you know. That we whatever number they've got, and it's one per family, remember, that's the number we can supply you with, no more. So Dad used to scrape them off religiously, all into a bucket. And so they'd be pulled out, and any sort of maggot he found sort of ended up in this bucket, you see. And when he put it back, it'd have a few holes in the paper, but nothing else. And he did it very deliberately, because as he said, well, if I could leave them there, but it would probably put a lot, however hungry they are, it's going to put a lot of people off, and they're going to come back for sure and say, look, this one's got maggots in, I want that changed. And as he said, I got nothing to change them for. So that's the sort of thing that happened in the occupation.
And the SS Vega, now this is a ship that brought in
The
packets
Vega,
of
yeah, that
rations.
came around Christmas time, 44.
And why was that brought over? Who authorised the SS Vega coming to Jersey?
I don't really know the answer to that. Remember, I was quite young at the time, really. I was sort of early teens. And I'm not quite sure, but obviously, I think probably our bailiff, we had a very good bailiff in Jersey. He was very strong, wouldn't listen to any cheek from the Germans from that point of view. I was very, very fond of him. You could admire him greatly. But anyway, he sort of sent off a thing to the Red Cross. Had to be done via Switzerland, I think, and said that we were running very low on food and asked if the Red Cross could do anything for us. And the result of that was the Vega. I can't remember how many times it came. It probably made about 4 visits to us from the day it was first called upon, or not called upon. I know that they filled this thing up, if my memory is right, in Lisbon. So it would come up with food from Lisbon, which wasn't in the war. It was interesting because there were food parcels, and I'll never forget, the food parcels basically came from 2 places. One was Canada, and the other one was New Zealand. And even then, I mean, it was interesting. It would have jam in it, it would have bully beef, it had various things, tea, probably a bit of butter, and so on. Probably some sugar, things like that, things that you could use. Probably coffee as well. I'm trying to remember, but it's difficult. I can basically remember, I mean, for example, one of the things that they always sent was something called skim, and it was milk which had been reduced to powder form, and you just sort of put water on it and just did this and it became milk. Not the best sort of milk, but milk, you know. And the interesting thing was, as I said to you, some came from Canada, some came from New Zealand. I personally preferred definitely the Canadian ones because it was beef. It was tinned beef, but it was beef. Whereas the ones from New Zealand always was lamb, and I never liked lamb as much as beef.
And did every household get one box?
Yeah, one box.
How it worked? And do you remember the feeling when you opened it up? Was it?
Oh, it was Father Christmas had come, honestly. Yeah. And it was dark because you see, with the Vega, I've heard it called all sorts of names since then. It was called the Vega during the occupation. I've heard it called the Vega by various people since, by a lot of people. But it was called the Vega in reality. And they brought flour. And it was ridiculous because we had run out of bread, 3 weeks, totally run out of bread because we had no more wheat left or anything, whether it had stalks and had husks and all the rest of it. We'd lost all that about 3 weeks before the Vega came. And it was absolutely ridiculous actually because the flour that was distributed was pure white. And I'll never forget when it first came and it was turned into bread. I mean, we were eating that bread with nothing on it, you know, but to us it was like cake. You know, the change was from the sublime to the ridiculous, really.
And during the occupation, what kind of entertainment did you do? Did you go to the cinema? Did you listen to music? I mean, what kind of music was played?
Well, the best cinema was grabbed by the Germans, and so most of us never saw the inside of that. West's, for example, it was a smaller cinema, older, and the big snag is the Germans would have you in the forum if you wanted to, but it was German propaganda stuff they were showing, you see. So most of us never went to it. But there was a lot of variety concerts that were put on by the locals. You would probably say as professionals that they were amateur, but on the other hand you could get a lot of fun from them.
Of course. So there were lots of concerts that you could go to and the Germans wouldn't object?
Oh no, they didn't object to it.
What kind of music was played?
All sorts, really. It was difficult, really, because you see there was music coming out all the time, and the few people who had the radio sets jolly well heard it. And if you had some new, for example, there was a film which came out in 1944. Bing Crosby was in it. Do you remember Bing Crosby? And it was called Going My Way. He played the part of a priest. And I'm trying to think what the tune was called. Would you like to be on a star or something? Or would you rather be a fish? Have you ever heard that funny thing? Well, I tell you what, if you hear any Bing Crosby thing, it's in it, for sure. Mm-hmm. And it was supposed to be a very light-hearted thing. He was supposed to be a priest, and he had all these young kiddies who were all wild as it could be, and he's trying to calm them down, you know, and he would sing these sort of ditties which were excellent. And one day I heard one of my first cousins going around singing this blooming song, and I thought to myself, blimey, you better not do that because that's obviously coming from a contraband wireless. So you want to pipe down, you know, otherwise you'll get caught. And you only need one German soldier hear that, and the next thing is you've got somebody serious searching right through your house, you know. Mm. So there you are. And
where were you the day Jersey was liberated? What was the atmosphere like, and what did the day mean to you?
As if you'd been let out of prison. we went out that day to my uncle, who was a farmer who lived out at Gorey, and I don't know where on earth he's got this flipping lorry from, but it looked like something that sort of had been designed by, I would think, Henry Ford as his first lorry, I would think, because it was wood, and it had a little window. Why they bothered to put the window in sort of was up there, but all this was sort of open to the, you know, and we all got in the back, and we were down in the Liberation Square, funnily enough, and I shook hands with the liberating officer, a fellow by the name of William Robinson, Colonel William Robinson, and he went up on the balcony at the Pomodoro, which is still there, and somebody dragged out because the place was packed. You know, it was you couldn't walk across because there were so many people.
How did people know to go to the Pomodoro?
Don't know.
People just congregated there.
It was as if it was a sort of a magnet, you know, and everybody was going to.
And did people know that the liberation was coming? How?
Yes, because funnily enough, I've forgotten the actual day they came, but I suspect it was Thursday. I might be wrong. Might have been Friday. Could even be Wednesday. But at the beginning of that week, we were told at the school that they'd been informed that liberation was happening that week, and we were all to go home. And so, yes, that's why everybody was excited at that time.
And was it just a kind of carnival atmosphere? Everyone.
Very much.
Everyone partying.
Very much. Yeah. And they dragged on that veranda. They dragged a piano out from out the thing, and the Tommies were actually playing this blowing thing. They probably were from an entertainment sort of part of the army, because they had to keep themselves entertained apart from anything else.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel that the occupation is taught in an appropriate way of the youth today, and do you feel it's remembered adequately in this island?
I think it is. It's well remembered. I personally don't go down anymore, because I always say to people sort of look at me and say, why don't you go down to the celebrations down at Liberation Square? And I say, because I was there on the day. I don't need to go down there to remember it, because I still remember it as if it was happening yesterday, you know.
Mm. And having experienced the occupation, how did it affect your outlook for the future of your life ahead? Do you kind of look at the future with trepidation? Do you worry about the future?
No.
That these kind of things might happen again?
No, I don't. It was a great experience. I'm against wars, though I always thought that after the last World War there wouldn't be wars for a long time, but they don't seem to have stopped happening, do they? You know, I mean, what on earth are our troops doing in Afghanistan? You hear day after day after day, some of them are killed, one or two or three. It's true, isn't it? And when you think about it, I really don't know what they're doing there. You realise when we come out, that'll be the third time that the British have been kicked out of Afghanistan, out of interest. Now, you know, there's not that number of British troops in there. There's probably altogether, I don't know, not much more, I don't think, than 20,000 when you include the Brits and the Americans and everybody else who are there. But you know, before the Americans and the Brits went in this last time, you realise that the Russians were there, and they had 200,000 troops, and they were still losing it, and they came out of their own decision, you know. And the last two occasions that the British were in there, well before the war, and probably in the last century and the century before, we were thrown out each time. So really speaking, I don't know what we're doing up there, because you're never going to convert the Taliban anyway. I don't know whether you think that we will.
No, probably not.
This is why I feel sorry to say it, because I had great hopes for him when he first came in, but I really cannot understand why Tony Blair ever got involved with Bush, because, you know, I reckon I'm serious about this, I reckon if Blair had not got involved with wars, he got involved in 5 wars, you know. I don't know if you appreciate that, but he did. Because I read a book that was in the library on one of the ships I was cruising on, and it said Blair and his wars, and he was in 5 wars. 3 of them were in the east of Europe, you know, like Serbia and places like that. So I reckon if he'd never got himself involved with wars at all, he'd still be in power. Because he had a nice personality and so on and so forth, and I think he pleased the public really.
And how did your life change after the occupation? How long did it take for food supplies to come back and for life to return to normal?
Very quick. I'll tell you what happened. Immediately the British government put in things like they really pushed food in this direction very quick, because they knew just how bad the place was for lack of the stuff. And one of the things they did, and I got hold of them because my dad being a grocer, but there were some wooden sort of boxes, and if you opened them there were tins inside, and they had what was called welfare biscuits. And the basket, the things were all about this high. And what I did was, there was plenty of German wood around. I got 2 lids, I got 4 of these tins like that, cold soldered the lids on them all the way around. So I got 2 lots of those, put a piece of wood like that with 1, 2, 3 and 1 underneath, 4. And with that German wood and these welfare tins, that was the first boat I ever got after the war.
You
I used
made
to go
a boat?
in this bay. I used to go all around the place in this bay, around this thing, you know, using it like and that was the start of my boating.
Wow, that's incredible. And did people in Jersey feel any kind of, I don't know, what did they feel about the fact that the English effectively abandoned Jersey in the war?
I don't think they could have done much else, to be fair. Remember what I explained to you about one day there was all these guns, machine guns pointing out. There was dozens, hundreds probably, of soldiers and Fleet Air Arm and probably Air Force as well, blokes around. And then suddenly we got up one day, they were all gone, you know. Well, what could it was Churchill by then. What could he have done? He couldn't have done anything else. What was the point of him staying here? Every single one of those people, if they'd have stayed, they'd have been captured in the end or killed, one of the two, for sure. And it probably would have ended up a lot more locals getting killed, because there was no way they could defend this. I mean, it's only 14 miles from France on the east coast.
So everyone understood.
Well, the vast majority did.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only sense, isn't it? You know, you don't need a degree to work that one out. So really speaking, I mean, look, they were just getting their own people out of Dunkirk at the time.
Mm. Do you ever have nightmares about the war?
No.
You didn't in the years following?
No.
Not at all. So do you feel
how do
you feel affected by it now?
Not at all.
Not at all.
I remember it from a long way back, although it feels like it's yesterday. I remember being very hungry, you know. I mean, people who say, "Oh, I'm not half hungry now," you know, they don't know what hunger is. You know, when you are really hungry and you haven't got anything to eat, you know, you almost start chewing wood. You know, it is quite different.
Yeah. Did people eat meat in the war, or?
They had their ration if they could get it. You couldn't always get it.
Okay, because I imagine livestock was very short in supply.
Very short, yeah. The truth of the matter is, you would get your ration if it was available. It wasn't always available, you see.
Mm-hmm.
But that's life, isn't it?
Okay, well, thank you very much for talking to me today, Grandpa. It's been really interesting.
It's been a pleasure to do it. I hope I haven't sounded too outlandishly bad, really. But everything I've told you is truthful as far as I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long time ago, you know. 45 when I got out of that. And I was 15. And I'm going to be 82 in 2 months. This pair of headsets, I must confess, I stole these out of a German tank in, by then it would have been sometime in 1945, out of one of the German tanks that was being stored or being kept on the pavement at Millbrook. And the reason I stole it wasn't just for the joy of stealing it, was because I couldn't get anything to listen to my crystal set at that time. Don't forget, by that time it wasn't so dangerous to have a crystal set, because France the French coast all round us had been liberated, and we continued to be under the Germans for about 10 or so months afterwards. And so by that time, you couldn't be sent off to France to be put in prison for being found with a set. So I wasn't being anything like as brave as the people who kept them right the way through the war. But this set has been used to listen to the news during the occupation, and as you can see, they're getting rather elderly now, but they were a very, very good pair of headsets.